You're listening to This is Yoga Therapy. I'm your host, Michelle Lawrence, and I've had the opportunity to interview many of those who are making a difference at the intersections of yoga and health. And I'm here to share with you their stories and conversations. Thanks for listening. In today's episode, I interviewed Dr. Lauren Tober. Lauren's a clinical psychologist and yoga and meditation teacher with a passion for health, healing, happiness, and awakening. She's the founder of the Yoga Psychology Institute, dedicated to navigating the challenges of being human through the lens of yoga and Western psychology, offering trainings for mental health professionals interested in bringing yoga into their therapy work, and for yoga teachers who want to support their students experiencing mental health challenges through the Global Mental Health Aware Yoga training. She also runs the Center for Mind-Body Wellness in Mullumbimby, Australia. And her new book, Mental Health Aware Yoga, A Guide for Yoga Teachers, was just published. So we're here to talk about all of this and a little more on the podcast today. It's just such a pleasure to meet you and have you here, Lauren.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast, and well done for nailing Mullumbimby. I know that's not an easy town to pronounce.
Thanks. I'd love if we could just start by having you share a little bit of your story, perhaps just a bit more about yourself, where you live, how you came to yoga, and how your work has evolved into your mental health aware yoga offerings.
Sure, I'd love to. Well, I live in a very beautiful part of the world on Bunjalung country in Mullumbimby in Australia. And this is a small town near the beach. We have the beach on one side, and we have the rainforest, the subtropical rainforest on the other. And it's a really beautiful community and a beautiful place to work. So I feel really privileged and honored to call this beautiful place home. In terms of how I came to be doing this work, I actually started practicing yoga when I was an exchange student in Vancouver. So in my early 20s, I went to Vancouver and I studied psychology, mainly psychology and sexuality and the philosophy of science at UBC. And that's where I got into yoga. I met someone at the youth hostel I was staying at, and he's like, come and do a yoga class. And so I tried yoga for the first time. And it was a Kundalini yoga class. And there was a part of me that was like, oh my goodness, what have I got myself into? Is this some kind of cult or something? This was more than 20 years ago when yoga wasn't as visible and popular and known as it is now. And so there's a part of me that was like, oh my goodness, what have I got myself into? And another part of me was like, I don't know what this is, but I love it. And I know I got to keep doing it. And so I kept practicing. Kundalini yoga wasn't my path. I know it is for some people that it wasn't, it didn't really speak to me. I found Ashtanga yoga and I practiced Ashtanga yoga for many years. I trained to be an Ashtanga yoga teacher in London and then in India, and I taught Ashtanga yoga. And I think, in my 20s, that just met me where I was at. That very kind of physical dynamic practice was what I needed, what my mind needed, what my body needed. But then I fell pregnant. Why do we say fell pregnant? It's not like I fell over accidentally.
We actually don't really say that in the U.S.
Oh, you don't say it in the U.S.? Oh, that's interesting.
Actually, I thought you were joking.
Ah, really? Okay, no, maybe it's an Australian thing.
That's funny.
I didn't trip over and get pregnant. My husband and I decided we wanted to have a baby. It was very intentional. There was no falling. And yeah, everything changed. My practice changed a lot. I stopped practicing Ashtanga yoga. My practice became very gentle and very intuitive and just kind of meeting what I needed on the day. And I practiced like that for a long time. And now in my late 40s, going into perimenopause, I'm kind of circling back to a stronger practice again, which is really really unexpected, but really just feeling what my body needs to be strong as I step into this next chapter. I mean, that was kind of my yoga journey in terms of my own practice. I was finishing off my psychology studies when I started yoga. So these kind of grew together. And to begin with, it was quite separate. I was teaching yoga over in this beautiful Buddhist center in Canberra in Australia. And I was doing my doctorate in clinical psychology, and I was researching yoga as part of it. And I had a clinical practice as well, because I was already a psychologist by this time when I was doing my doctorate. But they were quite separate. And there wasn't anybody that I knew that was bringing yoga and psychology together. Like mindfulness was just starting to enter into the psychology world. I think we did like a couple of hours of mindfulness in my doctoral program. But yoga was like out there. Nobody was doing it. I didn't know anyone that was talking about it. I came across this book by a wonderful woman called Amy Weintraub. Perhaps you know
Oh,
her, Yoga
she's
for
a dear one.
Depression. Yes, she is. And her book was really like a guiding light for me. I think I found it when it first came out, and it gave me hope that there were other people into this world. I'm sure there was a lot of people doing this in India, but in my world, that wasn't part of it. And yeah, so it was very separate, the yoga and the psychology. And then over the years since then, it's been gently, gently coming closer and closer together. And now, I bring yoga into my work as a psychologist, and mental health and the understanding of psychology is a big part of when I teach yoga. And then in the past, I don't know how long, maybe 10, 15 years, I've been teaching on different yoga teacher training courses. And then in the last 5 or 6 years, I developed this Yoga Psychology Institute and teaching mental health aware yoga, which is a yoga, like a training course for yoga teachers to support them to really understand mental health and how they can support their students in their yoga classes.
While staying in their scope of practice, right?
100%. Scope of practice is a big part of the training. Yeah.
That's so lovely, Lauren. I can relate to so much of what you shared. I'm not a mental health professional myself, but just elements of your story and your origins with yoga, and then coming into Amy's book, Yoga for Depression, which really was so groundbreaking and pioneering at the time, and really transformative for me in my life. And Amy became one of the first faculty in our yoga therapy program 15 years ago.
Oh, amazing.
So yeah, and just big kudos to her. And now I think it's just so explosive in terms of how recognized yoga is as an effective treatment for mental health, alongside other modalities, of course, too. But I do want to give shout out and thanks to Amy.
Yes, thank you, Amy. I was also reading Ariel Schwartz's new book yesterday on polyvagal applications of yoga. And yes, she gave a shout out to Amy at the beginning of her book as well.
I think we all would be remiss if we didn't, for those who have come after, because she was so early on in terms of from a Western perspective, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about the role of yoga teachers at the front line of mental health care. You kind of put that front and center on your website and in your book too. And I agree. I see that too. I don't really see that statement though. So it grabbed my attention. Yoga teachers at the front line of mental health care. And so you note actually that nearly 80% of yoga students report practicing yoga for mental health reasons. And I think that came from an Australian study, but I believe that there's a lot of folks in the United States as well that come to yoga for mental health reasons. I'm one of them, and that was a long time ago. And so could you share with us more about the study and when you first noticed that this was the case, students coming to yoga for mental health, and just even maybe a little bit more about what that means, yoga teachers at the front line of mental health care?
Sure. So the study was a PhD research done by a guy called Stephen Penman here in Australia. And it was done a long time ago, like 20 years ago. And I haven't seen any more recent research that has that's looked at this. I'd love to see it if there is. So I am imagining that as yoga has become even more popular and our openness talking about mental health, I think, has increased, that these stats might be even higher. But so this was a research project that he did for his PhD research. I was living in London at the time. I remember filling out, I completed his questionnaire at the time. And he looked at I can't remember what the study was called now, but it's like the state of yoga in Australia or something like that. So he asked a lot of different questions about why people started yoga and why people continued yoga. And he looked at yoga students and he looked at yoga teachers to get an idea of the state of yoga. And so if you find this paper, there's a lot of stats in it, like a lot of different areas that he looked at. The one that I was particularly interested in was mental health. And so his research found that 58.4% of yoga students reported that they started yoga for mental health reasons. So that's over half report. And, he didn't really go into a lot of detail what that was. It was mainly around stress and anxiety. And then he asked people, well, why do you continue to practice yoga? And yoga students said that 79.4%, so nearly 80% of yoga students reported that they continue to practice yoga for the mental health benefits. And whenever I share these stats with people, like when I hold a training and we start talking about this and I ask people to share where they started yoga, nearly everybody in the room will say, yeah, that's why. It might not have been the only reason. There might have been other reasons as well. But the mental health benefits, you often around stress, sometimes around anxiety and depression, sometimes because of trauma, for so many different reasons. People are starting yoga and continuing to practice yoga because of the mental health benefits that it brings. And so for that reason, what that says to me is that people are coming to yoga classes for their mental health. And if we think nearly 80%, if you've got 10 people in a class, 8 out of 10 people are there. That's the majority of your class are there for mental health reasons, which for me means that yoga teachers are really, like, people who are showing up to yoga classes. They might not be going to their doctors. They might not be seeing a psychologist. Some of them will be getting help elsewhere. Many of them won't be, which really means that yoga teachers, people are coming to yoga classes for mental health reasons. So yoga classes really, like I said on the website, at the forefront of contemporary mental health care and have a beautiful role to play in supporting people's mental health, whether it's, simply coming to classes or having private sessions. If people are wanting to maintain their mental health or have maybe some mild mental health symptoms, that might be enough. Alternatively, if they're needing some more support, a yoga class is great, but it's not, let's face it, it's not enough if you have significant mental health challenges or you're going through a really difficult time. The yoga teacher can be a wonderful, somebody who can support them to connect in with other services, whether it be a yoga therapist like yourself, or a psychologist or another therapist, or get in Australia,
yoga
you have to go
therapist too.
Exactly, a yoga therapist, yeah. So it can be a great place to be able to access other services.
That's wonderful. Yeah, everything you said just makes so much sense. So let's dig in a little bit too to what are we talking about in terms of scope of practice? Because many yoga teachers are not also therapists.
Mm-hmm.
Some are,
Yeah.
right? And
more they are.
More and more.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's say that the yoga teacher is not a therapist. So how can they support their students' mental health while staying in their scope of practice? What are some of the key principles, if you will, of your mental health aware yoga?
I love that you brought up scope of practice because this is so important. And I think the first thing we need to do is work out what our own scope of practice is. And this is going to be different for everybody, right? So many yoga teachers have other skills as well. They might be, there's yoga therapy, there's psychology, someone else might be a naturopath or a nurse or a doctor. Everyone has their own scope of practice, or a teacher. So I think the first step to do is to sit down and say, well, what is my scope of practice? What am I trained in? What am I experienced in? What do I feel confident in doing? And work out what that is for you.
Because you could actually be trained in some of those things and not be confident in them too, right?
Yeah. And often when you have just finished a training, it takes a while to get experienced and confident. I think it took me 10 years after finishing my psychology training where I really felt like, okay, I've got this. Like when people come in my room, I feel really confident. Yeah. So that's important. And if, like you said, like you have completed a training and you're not feeling confident, that's when you have support, when you have mentoring and supervision and you practice and you develop that capacity until you do have that confidence. Okay, so scope of practice. The scope of practice as a yoga teacher is to teach yoga, and it's not to offer counseling or aromatherapy or massage or anything that's outside of the scope of practice as a yoga teacher. And I think sometimes our students expect us to know all the things, and we can kind of get drawn into that. And I know myself, like I've had when I'm teaching a yoga class, I remember one student came up to me, and this happened a bit, but one student in particular came up to me and said, I've just had surgery. Can you tell me which yoga practice I should do to help with my recovery? And that is not within my scope of practice. My scope of practice is as a yoga teacher and a psychologist. And so my answer was, that's a really great question. That's not something that I know enough about to help you with, but we do have a really great yoga teacher who's also a physiotherapist at the studio. How about I get you in touch with him and he can support you with that? So that's when it comes back to understanding our individual scope of practice. In terms of if we are a yoga teacher, our scope of practice with mental health, there's so much we can do as yoga teachers. I think creating a safe container in the yoga class, whether we're teaching groups or one-on-one, is a beautiful thing, and a really helpful and often profound thing we can do is to create a sense of safety. So our students come in and they feel seen, they feel heard, there's no judgment, there's this compassionate lens that we're seeing them through and holding that space. That in itself, it's often something that we do really well as yoga teachers, and something that maybe we don't give enough emphasis to, because that in itself, the healing relationship and the safe space, is really profound for mental health and healing.
Absolutely. I'm going to speak to that for just a moment. I know you've got more, but that is so much of what Amy has taught from day one. And we have adopted that in our yoga therapy program too, as one of the principles of yoga therapy that we teach. So it is so incredibly important. And I'm giving Amy another shout out because she spells that out in her book and in her trainings, how important that is in the container, right? And in the therapeutic relationship and in this space of healing.
Yeah. And, there's so many other things that we can offer, but if that's all we offer, that's amazing. It really is. So we don't want to underestimate that, and we can hone our skills in that as well. What else we can do? The way that we practice, the way that we teach can be incredibly helpful. So, what we want to do, what we talk about in mental health or yoga, and no doubt what you talk about in your training as well, is to meet our students where they are.
That is that's our third one.
It is. Okay.
Yeah. We've got 4. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that's meeting our students where they are, in terms of meeting them as a person where they are. So instead of trying to fix or change or try to rescue our students, we want to meet them where they are, exactly where they are. And as Carl Rogers talked about, this kind of unconditional positive regard for our students. But then also in terms of when we share practices, whether it's a group or whether it's one-on-one, is that we want to meet them where they are with that. So if our students or the class is more rajasic, we want to start with something a little bit more active, and then gently take it down a notch to support our students to come to a more sattvic state. If our student or the class is more tamasic, then we want to start with something slower and gently, if it feels okay for the student to upregulate, to bring them to a more sattvic state. So we can deliver different yoga practices and the way that we sequence the practices together that can be supportive of meeting our students where they are and supporting them to come to a more sattvic state.
So good. Anything else? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more, but anything else that you think is a key principle, guide point in terms of how you teach? Maybe it's languaging.
Yeah, I mean, the language that we use is really powerful. I think one of the really important things that we do as yoga teachers, which we could stay within our scope of practice and still be really helpful, is to support our students to come back to their bodies. So many of us live in our heads, whether that's because we've spent too much time at university and we have a really kind of intellectual existence. When we're depressed or we're anxious, there's often a lot of rumination that goes on. So we spend time thinking things over and over again, overthinking, getting stuck on thoughts. We go to psychology, we go and see a psychologist. Often we're talking about the story. And so we can spend a lot of time in our heads. And one of the beautiful things that yoga does so well, and that is within our scope of practice as yoga teachers, is to come back into the body and the breath. So that can be as simple as moving the body and breathing. It can be an invitation to notice sensation in the body as it unfolds. Notice the breath as it moves in the body, bringing our attention back to the body so we can reside back in the body.
Yeah, all of that is just so helpful, important, and I think right on in terms of how yoga teachers can be here with the most benefit for our students.
Yeah. And I think, with this idea of scope of practice, I think sometimes we can think, oh, I can't do that or I shouldn't do that. But more it is such a gift to stay within your scope of practice. I think it's a relief for yourself because you don't have to kind of pretend to know things that you don't know.
Absolutely.
It makes it safe for your students because you're not doing things that you're not 100% sure about. But it is also staying with the body and the breath is something that often doesn't happen outside of the yoga class. So it is an incredible, incredible gift, and we shouldn't underestimate that.
Yeah. So let's talk about the flip side a little bit. So that's where mental health professionals, the social workers, the counselors, psychotherapists, psychologists, etc., who are seeking to incorporate yoga skills into their professional practice. So they have their scope of practice, right? And so we see a lot of this in yoga therapy training where, there's mental health professionals that want to incorporate yoga skills, and they also want to become a yoga therapist and kind of have the dual scope of practice. So
how wonderful.
I know your book is specifically written for yoga teachers, but I know you also work with mental health professionals. But maybe talk about how it's different. How's it the same? How's it different? How's it being received, your work, by the mental health professional community?
Yeah, it's been amazing the way that this has unfolded. I wrote the book Mental Health Aware Yoga for yoga teachers, and the training that goes with that is I wrote for yoga teachers. But there's been so many therapists, psychologists, and other mental health professionals that have come and done the training as well. So these are people who are also psychologists or other mental health professionals and yoga teachers. And thinking about, well, how can I bring these worlds together? Because it isn't always easy to bring them together. Like it took me 20 years to kind of thread it together and to figure it out. So to bridge the gap between what we're learning as in the mental health world and then what we're learning in the yoga teacher training and how to thread it together. So we've had lots of mental health professionals come and take the training. And they use the material and read the book, and they use the material in different ways. Some want to teach regular studio classes and bring it together. Some want to do one-on-one sessions. Some want to run kind of more therapeutic groups or on retreats. And some people want to bring some of the practices into their one-on-one therapy work. Like I said at the start, when I started doing this, I didn't know anyone until I found Amy's book. Like I didn't know anyone that was kind of bringing this world together. But now I get emails from mental health professionals all the time saying, how are you doing this? I want to know more. And more I'm doing some one-on-one mentoring and supervision with mental health professionals who are also yoga teachers to thread these worlds together. And just like mindfulness was like 18 years ago when I was doing my doctorate, and it was kind of new and people were figuring it out, I feel like yoga is kind of there now, and there's becoming more and more interest in it. The research is backing it up. People are really, like, clients are into it, but health professionals are into it. Doctors are referring to it. And I feel like we're at the beginning of something really amazing. It's just going to keep growing and growing.
I feel that too, certainly.
You do?
Oh, yeah. This is the world that I live in as well, yoga therapy, where we can see the intersections of yoga and health, whether it be mental health or other aspects of health. So I really enjoyed our conversation, Lauren. I've got one last question for you, and I typically end the podcast this way, and that is for you to share a little bit about your own practice, your personal yoga practice, that is, because we put so much emphasis on that in our yoga therapy training programs at Inner Peace Yoga Therapy. And I really feel like in order to do some of the things that you describe, like safe container and meet the client where they are, that we also teach in our program, you can't do that unless you are steeped in a practice yourself, unless you are showing up authentically for yourself, and having a personal practice is one of the ways to do that. So I'm curious to know what your daily practices might look like.
I love this question. My practice has changed so much over the years, and it's changed with, if I've had kids or not have kids, if I'm studying or working or traveling. There's been times, the different teachers that I've studied with over the years, there's been times where I've had a very kind of rigid practice. Like I get up in the morning and at a certain time and do certain practices. Now, at the season of my life that I'm in now, what it looks like is it's a very gentle practice, and a practice that's quite intuitive. And so as I'm in my late 40s, I'm coming into perimenopause, the lesson that I'm getting at the moment is the need to really tune in and listen to what I need on a moment by moment basis, and for it to be a very loving, compassionate way that I practice. And so that's kind of the lens that I come through with my practice. And what that looks like practically is most mornings when I get up, I'll sit. So I have an altar and I sit. And my intention every morning is to kind of get okay with myself. Like land in myself so I feel ready to face the day. And so I'll do whatever I need to do to achieve that, depending on where I'm at. Mostly what that looks like is sitting in silence. I light a candle and I sit and I listen to the birds outside and I feel the sun rising, coming through the window on my skin, and I just sit with whatever is there. Sometimes there's some pranayama that comes in there. I often have these archetypal cards that I'll pick a card and I'll sit with what comes up, and I might journal about it and set an intention for the day for myself. And sometimes that process is a couple of minutes, sometimes it's 20 or 30 minutes, depending on what else is going on in my day. And then throughout the day, I kind of thread the sacredness or sadhana through my day. So maybe I go for a beach walk and I'll be being very intentional when I work, being present in my body and the sounds of the ocean. When I eat, I'll take a moment to say a blessing before I eat. When I sit down to work, I nearly always light a candle and take a moment to, really check in with myself and have gratitude for this, the privilege of doing this work that I love so much. When I walk outside, I'll feel my feet on the earth and give thanks to the land and to the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on here in Bunjalung country. So I really try to thread that practice through my day. If I feel dysregulated through the day, I'll stop and I'll check in with that and do what I need to do. And sometimes it'll be a breath practice. Sometimes it's putting on some music and dancing it out. Sometimes it'll be pouring a cup of tea and just sitting with the steam. And then I've started in the last year or two going to yoga classes again, and I didn't go to yoga classes for a long time. I had my own practice at home. But like I was saying at the start, a few years ago, I pulled a muscle in my back and I thought, I don't want to do this. And I want to be strong. And as I'm getting older, I want my bones to be strong. And so I started going in the last couple of years to some really dynamic yoga practices like vinyasa. It has music, very different to what I've been doing for a long time. But I'm really enjoying it. I'm getting strong. I feel good in my body. I think because I practiced Ashtanga yoga for so many years, like the flow and the sun salutations, they feel like coming home to me. I also did a lot of dancing. I used to teach dancing. I grew up dancing. I used to teach dancing in my 20s. And so there's something in the music that feels really familiar to me as well. And now I know some people say, well, that's not real yoga, like the music and blah, blah, blah. But there's something in it for me that just feels good. It's not the way that I teach, but it's the way that I'm enjoying practice at the moment. So maybe 3 or 4 times a week, I'll go and do a class like that as well.
Wow, that all sounds so great. Yeah, and thanks for giving us a little peek into your practices. And I, again, really enjoyed meeting you, speaking with you, learning about what you do, and I hope our paths cross again in the future. Good luck with everything.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast and for letting me share a little bit about the book. I really appreciate it.
If you'd like to learn more about who we are and what we do, visit us at innerpeaceyogatherapy.com.